So this is going to be my first time presenting for the Kansas City Microsoft 365 user group. So again, I'm very appreciative to have me here. Today we're going to be going over a level 100 session. So this is going to be kind of a high level overview of Microsoft Teams Voice. The goal of this is to really show what the features and functionality Teams Voice can offer you, what type of devices we have out there, and kind of how you would start to structure a voice deployment for your business. So we're going to go through just a brief introduction about myself. My PowerPoint slide would go forward. That would be great. Do a brief introduction on myself. We'll look at what Teams Voice is. We'll look at all the different options, what we look at from licensing standpoints. Then we'll kind of hop into the different device types, look at analog options in case you have some of those still in today's environment. And then also talk briefly on E911 information as well as it pertains to the United States, because it's not just as simple as turning a key, adding a license, and saying you have voice. There's a lot more requirements from a U.S. perspective for Dynamic 911. So we'll go ahead and start off with an introduction. My name is Eric Marsi. I'm from Barberton, Ohio. I'm a three-time Microsoft MVP, was just fortunately renewed, so very humbled and honored on that. And I'm also the founder and principal solutions architect at Voltec Solutions. Have this giant list of certifications. You're more than welcome to read through that. I don't feel like I need to for things, but some of my hobbies involve reverse engineering, security research. I like playing around with things, trying to figure out how things work and seeing if I can make it do different things. I also build electronics, ski, and also four-wheel. If you're interested in reaching out to me on any of my social platforms, my website, my X, formerly Twitter account, and also LinkedIn profile is there below. So let's go ahead and talk about what is Teams Voice and kind of what the options and different flavors are and how it would better benefit your organization. So by voice, what are we meaning? We're not just meaning picking up a phone call and calling somebody else inside your organization with your existing Microsoft Teams deployment. We're talking about connectivity to the PST and the public switch telephony network. So this is where you're going to have a E164 number in the US. So that's +1, 10 digits, and that's going to be your number for your phone that says, I can dial to this destination and go from there. And again, when we talk about voice in the regards of this presentation, we're talking about calling people that are external from your existing Teams telephony platform. Now, this does include meetings as well. So with Teams phone calls, if you place an outbound call to an individual and you're in a one-on-one call, and the moment you take that call and you add a third participant, what would traditionally be called a three-way call, it is actually converting that to a meeting. So even though you've now got a meeting, potentially, you're still able to place those outbound PSTN calls from that meeting so that you can bring external participants in. So there's kind of just a broader picture here at play versus just one phone dialing out or one user dialing out from their Teams desktop client. So when we look at the Teams voice connectivity options, we have kind of three groups. We have our calling plans option. Calling plans are more or less going to be your most simplistic, most easy to use, fastest to deploy option, as it is hosted by Microsoft. Microsoft is the phone provider being brought into Microsoft Teams. It is fully managed from within the Teams Admin Center. It is fully managed by Microsoft. If you have an issue, you open a support ticket with Microsoft. Now, Operator Connect is kind of calling plans, but it's calling plans extended to other carriers. So instead of relying on Microsoft to be the provider, you're now bringing your own carrier or BYOC. So let's just say you today have an existing relationship with a Verizon or a Lumen SIP trunk going into your existing phone system. Maybe you don't want to cancel that trunk and maybe incur the cost of a contract penalty if you're terminating that earlier. So what you can do is that carrier is supported carrier by Operator Connect. You can take that service and they'll migrate you over to Operator Connect with keeping that existing contract relationship with that partner. So now you have nothing on premises and your numbers are able to be moved over to Microsoft's cloud. And that phone service is going in through that carrier directly to Microsoft's cloud. You have nothing else to worry about. This also includes Teams Phone Mobile. We'll talk about that here in a future slide, so you're familiar with that. But the last option, the most flexible option, is direct routing. Direct routing allows you to bring your own trunk or bring your own carrier to Teams. Now, there is a difference here between Operator Connect and direct routing. Direct routing, if you bring your own carrier to Teams, their SBC on their side is pairing to Microsoft, and they're the ones that owns the phone number, but they're not necessarily an operator with Operator Connect. Bringing your own trunk means that you're taking a trunk off of your SBC, whether you don't have one today or you have an existing one. You're going to be trunking that call flow from your SBC to Microsoft's cloud. So you're managing that relationship now instead of Microsoft or another carrier just kind of, hey, we're going to take care of these things. But it gives you that flexibility because now you, as the carrier in a way, have the ability to say, okay, we're going to put a brand new SBC in between our old phone system and our SIP trunk. But now, as we want to migrate users, we can say that these numbers go over to Microsoft Teams and there's no porting process required. You have the ability to flip that switch yourself with your own infrastructure. So there's a lot of things there that can be customized around direct routing. We'll touch base on that here shortly. So kind of going back a little bit, we'll start off with calling plans. Excuse me. So calling plans, they are designed to be convenient. Now, Microsoft, again, is the carrier, and that convenience does come at a cost. The big thing that benefits from calling plans benefits versus over direct routing is that it's managed directly in the Teams admin center. So you're dealing with phone number assignment, your phone number database, everything is fully within the side of the Teams admin center. You also have no external vendor relationships to set up, and the numbers that are owned can be used for audio conferencing. So that means if you have a number that you port to Microsoft, you can assign it to a dial-in conferencing service in Microsoft's cloud. And you can say, if they dial this number, it'll say, hey, welcome to the audio conferencing bridge. Please enter your ID. So if you look at your email, you'll be able to have that. But the benefit is instead of just using a shared number, you can use a number that you own. So it's a local area code and it's something that you ported into Microsoft. Now, there are some cons here. And again, the convenience comes with some cons. The first one being minute limitations. We're going to talk about that when we get to the specifics on licensing. But there is a limitation on how many calls you're allowed to make outbound from your Teams client. It's also limited to a certain subset of regions. Not every region across the globe has a calling plan license available for it. So there are some countries that don't have that, so you might have to rely on other voice connectivity solutions in those areas. The other thing with this is that there is a high cost. A lot of carriers, you typically pay 50 cents to $1 per DID, and then you're paying per minute usage roughly around 0.002 cents a minute. Which when you look at a calling plans license, those are, the base licenses, for the US at least, is roughly $12 user a month. And sometimes if you start scaling that to, 100, 200, 300 people, that price can get very costly compared to what you can get with another voice offering solution. The other thing to mention is that there are no custom integrations. And what I mean by that is that maybe you have some type of analog integration on premises. You've got something that's legacy that you need to bring into Microsoft Teams. You cannot do that directly with calling plans. You have to rely on other solutions to bring that service into that. Now, calling plans, we have two ways of getting phone numbers with Teams. So you can either port in your existing numbers. So when you're ready to migrate to Microsoft Teams, you can say, we want to port every number that we own, we want to port those directly to Microsoft Teams. So the moment that we port those to Microsoft Teams, Microsoft now is the carrier that owns those numbers. So that process is not quick. Minimum, you're looking at 35 to 45 days between the carriers to get those ported over. And they're also very picky. If you even try doing the porting worksheet from Microsoft and you miss one letter or a period, even in a name, the whole port request will be denied. So it's a very picky process. Now, the other option for calling plans is that you could just simply acquire net new numbers. So maybe, you have like one main line that you're going to port over, but all the numbers that were assigned to users previously, you don't care if those are ported or not. To make the process simpler, you can acquire net new numbers with your specific area code or specific region for those users directly from Microsoft without having to port those numbers in. Now, calling plans has one additional feature that none of the other voice routing scenarios has, and this is actually new, launching in Q4 this year. So this is called shared calling. So typically before, the general mindset has been if a user wants to have a dial pad in Microsoft Teams, when they place that call in Microsoft Teams, it has to go out as a unique phone number for that user. That way, if one call goes out and they call it back, that gets directly to that user. The problem with that is that if you start looking at, let's just say 100, 200 users using calling plans, and let's just say you're doing the $12 a month plan, that gets very costly. So what Microsoft's working on is a solution called shared calling. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to say this one number that is assigned to a resource account. Resource accounts are kind of like a fake user that you can assign for different things such as auto attendance, call queues, or something that's like a voice service. You can assign that phone number to that resource account, and then anybody who's part of the shared calling group, you're allowing them to make phone calls on behalf of that number. And when a call comes back in for that number, it'll let you select what user you want to call. Now, this saves you the cost of a Teams calling plan license, but it still requires the cost of a Teams phone standard license. So where you would just typically have, a calling plan or like kind of a mixed calling, there's a bunch of different license types that Microsoft has available, where you have both the phone system and the calling plan combined together. You still have to do that minimum $8 a month phone system charge for this, but you don't have to buy all those calling plans per user. You just have to buy one for a subset of users. Now, this supports anywhere from 2 to 10,000 users. So that limit is pretty high. I mean, I don't see anybody really using this to up to 10,000 users because of the next note that I have here as well. Because each calling plan license comes with a subset of minutes that you're allowed for outbound dialing. Inbound dialing on calling plans is completely free. Whether you're international or domestic, it is completely free on inbound dialing. But you still have to pay for the plan. It's not just, you don't pay for a plan, you get inbound for free. You still have to pay for a plan, just the minutes don't count towards your usage. It's the outbound minutes that count towards your usage. So as an example, the standard US domestic calling plan has 3,000 minutes per license. And that is pooled at the tenant level per region per license type. So that might be a lot to kind of grasp what that means. So in the US, there's kind of three big license tiers. There's domestic calling plan, domestic 120 calling plan, and domestic international calling plan. So the domestic calling plan, again, is at 3,000 minutes. Domestic 120 is 120 minutes per month. And the domestic international is 3,000 minutes of domestic outbound and 600 minutes of international included in that calling plan. Now, we'll talk about those licenses here a little bit more in a few more slides. But the thing that we want to mention here is that if you have those three different license types in your tenant, and let's just say you have 3 licenses of each, if a user is assigned one of those, the minutes for the other ones that are pooled together, so let's say you have 3,000 minute policies, so that means 9,000 minutes per month. If that user is assigned, 9,000 here, but the other one runs out, you're going to run into a scenario where you do not have the ability to use those other minutes that are part of those policies. Again, it's pooled per license plan per region. And then the region is where you're assigned in Office 365, where your license is assigned. So if you're showing that you're in the United States, you only have access to the licenses and the pools within that region, whether or not you have a domestic for like a UK user or not. So it can get a little bit complex in licensing and what you look at minutes. But if you're running a single calling plan with 10,000 users, you're going to run out of minutes very quick because you've only got 3,000 minutes to play with for outbound. So, you have to build this accordingly. So you may not just want to just share a number across a large group of users. Again, that is coming in Q4 of 2023. So this is fairly new. This is pretty much not even a month old off the press. So this is a brand new feature coming around. The next calling scenario that we talked about was Operator Connect. And again, Operator Connect, again, is a way to think of calling plans, but it's not Microsoft in the background, it's your carrier. So again, pros here are that it's convenient. It is fully managed directly in the Teams Admin Center, much like calling plans. It is a little bit different because there's a special area for Operator Connect, but it's very, very simple and very similar to what you use for calling plans. And the big benefit here is that you don't have to have any on-prem infrastructure, but you can extend your existing support agreement into Microsoft's cloud directly. Now, the cons here is that the carrier controls the rates. There's not a rate list or anything being shown in the Teams Admin Center. It is your responsibility, and based on your contract with your carrier, to say these are the rates that we are going to pay. Sometimes that could be cheaper, sometimes that could be more expensive, and some carriers may even charge more for it going to Teams Operator Connect. Again, this is also limited to a small region not a small region, but a smaller region versus even calling plans. But it's also limited to a small subset of carriers. Not every carrier is going to be in here. So if you look, from a, you know, business perspective, if you've got AT&T SIP trunks to your business, AT&T SIP trunks necessarily aren't included here if they're on some type of other plan, not AT&T business. So again, there's multiple scenarios you have to look at here. And then also, there are no direct custom integrations. Now, I put an asterisk at the end of this. And the reason why I put that asterisk is some carriers allow what we call an open SIP registration service. So that is where maybe I have an analog fax machine. I want to have a gateway that lets it register to my carrier to get phone service. Those carriers will offer that service to be able to build that custom integration. But you're pretty much not even touching Teams at that point. You're just getting a phone service through the carrier and using their custom integrations, but that's not routing through Teams. Okay. Now, the other portion of Operator Connect is Teams Phone Mobile. So Teams Phone Mobile is kind of a subcategory within Operator Connect. And this allows you to assign your business's phone number that is assigned to your user account. So typically, you just assign your 10-digit phone number to your user and that's it. But if your carrier owns your phone number through the Operator Connect program, they can now assign that phone number to both your cell phone and to your Teams client. Now, why would you want this? Why wouldn't you want a separate phone number for each? Well, first, single phone number. If somebody dials that phone number, it brings both your mobile phone and your Teams client. Now, a lot of times, if you're using Teams today, you might be able to say, hey, I got a call coming in already on my Teams phone. If I get a call to my account today, whether it just be a Teams to Teams call, what's the purpose of this? Sometimes there are areas where people that are, frontline workers in the field that are working where they may not have full data service and they may not get that Teams call, where they might still just have enough to have a voice call over a standard 3G signal instead of like your 4G, 5G. So this is a benefit that you've got where those frontline workers in those remote areas might be able to have service where you don't need the full Teams app experience. But the benefit that you also get by assigning the phone number to both locations is that you get unified presence, you get unified call history, and you get unified voicemail. So if somebody leaves a voicemail on your phone, you're going to see it on your built-in phone's voicemail app, and you'll see it in Microsoft Teams. You'll see if you make a call on your cell phone, you'll see that on your phone and Microsoft Teams, whether or not you're in the Teams app or not. This is managed directly from the Teams admin center. So managing the phone, managing the actual the policies that say if you place a call on the phone, does it route through Teams or to the carrier or route directly to the carrier? A lot of that's managed directly and centralized within inside the Teams admin center. Again, this is limited to a small subset of regions and carriers. It is not open to every single carrier out there. AT&T cell phones from a business side don't have this. It's only Verizon today in the U.S. that has the integration for Teams Phone Mobile. There is a video that Microsoft kind of released on this, and it just kind of shows that if both clients are ringing, you'll see the notification on both clients. And then your presence also is the same between the mobile experience and your desktop. Now, the other thing that has come with this is that they are extending what carriers are part of this program. So today, generally available, you've got Rogers Business in Canada, Telia in Sweden, T-Mobile in Germany, Swisscom in Switzerland, and Verizon here in the US. They're adding BT in the UK, Telia in Norway and Denmark, Swisscom in Liechtenstein. I probably just horribly pronounced that. I apologize. And then there's additional markets and operators still in the process of coming on board. One of the big ones that I would hope that comes to the US is AT&T, but unfortunately, Microsoft's not released anything there. But they are expanding the service, so it's kind of still in its infancy in a way, but it's coming up and being added on as time goes on. Now we get to my favorite topic, direct routing. Direct routing is the ability to bring your trunk into Teams for voice, and it provides the most flexibility for a Teams voice deployment. You're effectively bringing your own trunks, your own voice service, whether you have PRIs going in your building, whether you've got a SIP trunk going in your building, whether or not you've got multiple carriers. You're terminating those on your equipment, whether that be on premises or in the cloud, and you're pretty much taking that phone service and then trunking that right to Microsoft. Now, the biggest benefit with direct routing is, again, it allows that interop between your existing phone system and Microsoft Teams for voice. And it allows for a staged migration without having to deal with all these ports and other complexities that you might run when moving the phone service to another carrier. So, as an example, we'll just say today you have an existing Avaya phone system, an Avaya IP office, and you've got a SIP trunk coming in from AT&T. Like just building a simple scenario where that SIM trunk goes into the Avaya phone system. You effectively take that cable out, you plug that into your certified Teams SBC, and then you run another cable from that SBC to the old Avaya IP office. Now, the way that is best to set these up is that you assign the same interface IP address that was assigned to that AT&T SIP trunk on the Avaya. You assign that to your external interface on your SBC. So pretty much your SBC now is acting as the Avaya, and AT&T doesn't see any difference in that scenario. And then the other cable that's going between the SBC and the old Avaya phone system, you're assigning pretty much a /30 network. So that's two usable IPs, one on the audio codes, one on the Avaya, and you're just changing a few things around. And then once you have your routing in place on your SBC, you just say, hey, forward all these calls here, unless it's a call that I destined for Teams, a destination DID that I destined for Teams. So then as let's just say you move the HR group, you compile a list of phone numbers, you put that in the SBC and you say, okay, now instead of routing to Avaya, the routes to Teams, you're the one in control of that migration then. And then also once you're ready to migrate completely and you switch all the numbers to Avaya, it allows you just to simply switch off that old Avaya environment and you're already up and running in Microsoft Teams. Now, all this flexibility comes with some cons. And the first one being SSL certificates. SSL certificates you can get for a validity period of 1 year. You have to consistently renew those every year, and you have to remember to renew those. When you renew those, you have to generate a CSR, which is a certificate signing request. You have to pay to your SSL provider. Let's just use DigiCert as an example, however many hundreds of dollars it is based on your certificate requirements. And then you get a PFX file each year that you upload to your SBC. You apply a few other settings to the SBC. And then once those settings are applied, you have to reboot that to reestablish that connection to Microsoft using the new SSL parameters. So there is potential for downtime as well, and you have to do these maintenance periods. So single SBC, that should be simple to manage. But if you're doing a much larger deployment, you're going to have a lot more SBCs that you need to worry about and potential for all that to go down at once if you forget to renew it. So again, there's that additional complexity. Additionally, the other con is that you have to maintain support agreements. You have to maintain, SBC relationships. There's still a cost to the SBC. There's still a cost for the support for that. Because what if that SBC dies? You need to get it replaced. You have to continue paying for that for your on-prem. Again, you get that flexibility, so it may be worth that. I just saw a message pop up. Give me 1 second. So are there any differences? This question comes from Chad Smith. Are there any differences in direct routing for GCC and direct routing versus non-GCC? So the difference is that if you're a GCC or commercial cloud, everything is the exact same. Because again, GCC is more or less still running commercial cloud. It's using the same endpoints as commercial cloud. It's just kind of a different licensing and a separarization of that. The difference comes around when you're talking GCC high and DoD and DoD high. Those Office 365 environments use different IPs, and they also have a smaller subset of features that are available to those environments. So, for example, GCC high, DoD high, they don't have any type of audio conferencing service that allows you to take in kind of anything external. So you're required to trunk your numbers into their cloud for audio conferencing versus just be able to use a Microsoft number that you can in GCC and commercial cloud. Hopefully that answers your question. So the other portion of direct routing is that there is a device you have to manage. You have to make sure you keep up to date. If there's any type of security vulnerabilities or bulletins posted by the SBC manufacturer, you have to make sure you keep that configuration up to date. The other big differentiation with direct routing with your environment is that there is no DID management in the Teams Admin Center. So Operator Connect, calling plans, you have the ability to go in there and say, I want to assign this phone number to this person, done, good to go. The way you do it with direct routing is you go click on your user and it says, hey, enter the E164 phone number that you want to assign to this user. There's no drop down list. There's no database. It is up to you to manage that list. So effectively, you're going to be keeping track of every DID and where it's assigned to in your environment in an Excel sheet, and then saying, oh, cool, I have this number free, and looking at that list, but it's not built into the Teams admin center. So that is a big differentiation versus your Operator Connect and calling plans. And overall, again, it's more complex, but again, it gives you that most flexibility. Now, there is an option here that I don't mention in this slide, but I mentioned on the next slide, is that there is 2 flavors of direct routing. So the first one that we have just talked about is where you are self-hosting your direct routing service. You're running your SBC on-prem or in the cloud. You're running it, you're managing it, you're taking care of everything. The other option is provider hosted, or otherwise known as direct routing as a service. Now, direct routing as a service can be in 2 different flavors as well that I don't mention here. The first flavor is a vendor manages your host and SBC for you, manages it, and the only responsibility you have is making sure that you have a PSTN trunk going to it. The other option is where we have the direct routing as service providers, where they're effectively like Operator Connect, but they're offering their solutions without being certified for Operator Connect, and more or less giving you a custom solution via their cloud. So you don't manage anything, but you get that flexibility that you get with direct routing. So that's the additional kind of tidbits on direct routing. So there's a few extra add-ins and a few extra features that you get there versus your calling plans and Operator Connect, but there's also some drawbacks and limitations as well. Now, licensing. This is the one that kind of started giving a brief bit on a little bit ago, but this is where things get complex. When it comes to Operator Connect and direct routing, it is very simple. But when we look at calling plans, this is where things get complex. And so much so that I can't even really fit everything really on these 2 slides to really explain this. So every user will require a phone system and calling plans license, except for when you're using shared calling, where it just requires the phone system license. Now, there are some limitations to this. First one being minutes is, again, you have the limited inbound minutes, but you have you have a limitation on your outbound minutes, and it depends on what plan you have. So again, we talked about the standard domestic calling plan in the US. It's 3,000 minutes in the US and Canada for domestic calls. And then the 120-minute plan is, obviously 120 minutes. Now, when you have a domestic calling plan outside of the US, so let's say you're a user in the UK and you buy a domestic calling plan, because again, that domestic calling plan is domestic for the UK, not domestic for the US at that point. You only get 1,200 minutes. So US, you get 3,000, and everywhere else you get 1,200 minutes. And then inside the US, you have the domestic international calling plan, which gives you the 3,000 minutes that you have with the standard domestic plan, but you get an additional 600 international minutes per month in addition to the 3,000 domestic. Now, I mentioned this part below, which is where it says anything past the allowed limits of the tenant are billed using communication credits. So communication credits are effectively like you transferring money to Microsoft's cloud and it's sitting there doing nothing until it's absolutely needed. It is only able to be added to your tenant with a credit card. You can't just say, oh, just bill me later. No, you have to have the money in there in the account, and you have to add it in manually with a credit card. So no POs, no nothing. It has to be added in with a credit card. But the nice thing about communication credits is, let's just say you're a small company. You have one user using calling plans. And let's just say you have the domestic international calling plans where you get the 3,000 domestic, you get the 600 international minutes per month. Now, let's just say you use all 3,000 of your domestic minutes and you use all 600 of your international minutes. What happens when you place an outbound call? Pretty much it says, okay, there's nothing left in the tenant license pool for that license in that region. Let's see how many communication credits they have. If they have communication credits, let's say $10. What it'll do is it'll kind of switch to a pay per minute hierarchy based on what country you're calling. So if you're calling the US versus the UK, the rates differ per minute. So then what it does is it just pretty much takes that call, allows you to complete that call, but you're paying as you go then at that point automatically in the background. Now, if it uses up all the money that is left in your communication credits, it will notify you that this is happening. But if you use up all the money that's left in communication credits, if you try to place an outbound call and there's no money in there and you've already hit your minutes limit, you won't be able to place the call. The call will fail. So it is something to definitely take in consideration when you talk about calling plans. Now, the other unfortunate thing is that There's no dashboard from Microsoft to manage this. There's nowhere where you can sign in and say, okay, what are my licenses? What do I have? What calling plans do I have? What's the amount of minutes I have per calling plan left per month? Where there's no dashboard provided for that. It is all kind of hidden from the user, hidden from the admin in the background. So you can't at any time see what your usage is in your tenant, unfortunately. So it's best usually just to have, $100 or so in communication credits, if depending on the size of your organization as well, load it up just to make sure that those outbound calls don't fail. Again, inbound will still continue working fine because those are free, but it's those outbound ones that will continue to fail at that point. So that's the first part on licensing. The second part is that there are pay-as-you-go plans versus just a 3,000 minute and 120-minute plan if you're not in the US. So again, it's unlimited inbound minutes like the other plans, but the user is only able to call out to 196 different countries and regions, but there are no outbound minutes included. So this is, again, using the communication credits or post-usage billing with a new commerce experience subscription only. But the big thing to note here is that they are not available for sale in the United States and Puerto Rico. But you can provision them on a user in the US and Puerto Rico if bought in other countries and regions. So if you buy one pay-as-you-go plan in the UK, you can assign that to a user here in the US, even though they're not in that same region, and they'll be able to use it for calling those users in the UK, but it won't work necessarily for the US. So it's kind of a new thing that they've been working on, but I would not try playing around with that, especially if it's a production phone system. If you're looking at calling plans, I would definitely stay with the domestic 120, or the domestic international calling plans. Oh, so Tisha, so it is announced for the United States recently, about a month ago. Awesome. So that will be updated. I appreciate that feedback as well. So it will be coming to the US. So great. So Operator Connect and direct routing licensing, very simple. You need one license, Teams phone system standard assigned to all your users. That's easy. If you have an E5, G5, A5 license, that is included already with that license bundle. But if you've got an E3, F3, E1, A3, no matter what that smaller license bundle is, you just have to add on an add-on license of Teams phone standard to those users so that they can make those, get a phone number assigned to those accounts. Operator Connect, you're going to have the additional cost of whatever the carrier does per user or per usage per month. And then direct routing, it's just pretty much whatever your existing relationship is with your carrier based on the amount of calls you have and the duration of those calls. So now we kind of looked at the Teams voice service at a very high level, but those are the specifics directly related to Teams voice. We want to talk now about Teams devices because, having a backend service is great, but what about the experience down to the user level and what the user is going to be using in your environment? So there's kind of four main categories that I'm putting here. There are different devices that are not related to voice, but I just want to talk about the four that I want to relate here as it stands. So we've got Teams phones. These are, again, phones that you would have in your common areas, front desk assigned to users. Teams displays are more or less a Teams phone with additional functionality. We'll talk about that here in a few. Teams rooms are the ability to convert a conference room into a conferencing platform where you can walk in, press the single button, boom, you're in a meeting, no other configuration needed. You don't have to bring your laptop, nothing else. And then Teams panels are more or less a scheduling device that is attached to those Teams rooms. So we look at Teams phones. They're Android-based devices. They have quite a few features assigned to them, such as hot desking, speed dial, call history, meetings and calendar. You can set up user delegation. That's where you have like a boss-admin relationship. You've got an executive assistant. You've got a CEO. The executive assistant wants to be able to receive the calls for the CEO in addition to their own calls. It allows you to set that up. And then also you have certain devices that support video calls. These devices also do Better Together, which is the ability so that the device is kind of an extension of the Teams client in your computers, where you can use the handset as an audio device for Teams on your PC. And they're also controllable via policies. So this is especially useful when you have a common area phone, so kind of like a front desk phone or something that is kind of in the front of a company that may or may not be in a secure environment where you don't want them playing with all the settings in the phone. Also, David went ahead and posted a message that says, can you please explain audio conferencing? Do you get this with phone system, or do you have to add per user? I'm referring to the dial-in number for meetings when participants don't have Teams and need to call in via normal phone call. Assume toll-free option is not needed. So dial-in conferencing recently switched to a free model. So you still have to get a license, but the licensing has turned to a free model where you can just pretty much go and provision quite a few of those. There's a great feature to have that they kind of made that. But again, that is dial-in conferencing. So dial-in conferencing is completely free. You assign it to your user, you're good to go. The moment that that cost gets brought up is in two different scenarios. Dial in to a toll-free number and dial out from within a meeting. So dial in when it's assigned to a local number or a shared number from Microsoft that they provide to your tenant, that is completely free. But the moment that you want to use a toll-free number that's specific to your organization, that will be billed at the current per minute rate that they are using from the calling country to that toll-free number. The other portion is if you're dialing out. So for example, we are right now in a meeting. We've got 19 people in this meeting. If I clicked on the people tab in the top right on my Teams client, it will say invite someone or dial a number. When I dial that number and I made that call outbound from this meeting, it's going to be using a certain pool that they give you for free. I forget the number off the top of my head, but there is a pool of minutes that they give you for free per free audio conferencing license. But after that pool is up, it will revert back to the communication credits in the tenant. So again, it's how many minutes do I have left? Okay, there you go. Satish mentioned that 60 minutes per user per month. So if you're dialing out for a meeting and you hit 61 minutes, and let's say you only have a single license in your tenant, you'll rely on the communication credits. But again, the likeliness of you going over that, especially if you have like 100 free licenses added to your tenant, very slim, but there is still a chance for you to go over that. Is conferencing independent of having a trans voice, or you get for free only if you have a voice plan? So conferencing is completely independent from your voice plan, whether or not you're Operator Connect, direct routing, calling plans. Doesn't matter if you have that or not. Audio conferencing is completely separate from that. And I put an asterisk on this again, is that if you are in GCC or commercial cloud, GCC High, DoD High, they don't have their phone service out of Microsoft's cloud. So it is reliant on you having your own trunk. So at that point, it's still free per se, but it's going over your own voice infrastructure in and out for that scenario. Now, there is another scenario that Microsoft doesn't talk about too much. It is also not in the Teams Admin Center. It is only over PowerShell. If you are using direct routing, whether or not you're commercial cloud or GCC, if you add that third person to the call and it converts that two-way call to a three-way call or a Teams meeting in a way, that call will by default originate from Microsoft's cloud and use that outbound minutes pool. Now, there is a new policy that was added like 6-7 months ago. It's the CS Online Audio Conferencing Routing Policy. Now, this is the same policy. It's a similar policy to your voice routing policies for direct routing, but it allows you to say if somebody is dialing out from a meeting, I want you to use our on-prem SBC. So when that call goes out, instead of the call originating from Microsoft's cloud, it originates from your user out through your direct routing trunks through your own SBC environment. Okay. Hope that answered everybody's questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask anytime. It's open Q&A the entire session as well. So for those that have not had the opportunity to look at the Teams Phone UI before, this is kind of the experience that you're looking at with the latest update of Teams Rooms. So on the left-hand side here, this is your home page. This is just kind of giving you your calendar notifications at a glance, shows kind of some quick actions calls, people calendar, and then there's a few options under more, such as walkie-talkie, voicemail. There's a few other options that can be enabled or disabled here. And when you click on the calls, this will let you get to the area where you can make your call, access your speed dials, and then also this picture on the right-hand side. This is the current in-call experience that you're going to see. This is recently updated again. The old experience was a little bit finicky, but the new one provides a lot bigger touch points for getting to your mic, transfer, call hold, call park, etc. Now, the Teams Phone experience recently expanded to mobile devices, and this is your shared mobile device scenario. So typically before, if you had a mobile handset you had to assign it as assign that phone handset as a full Teams enabled user. So if you set the handset up, and let's just say it was for a warehouse as an example, if they signed in, they had a full functional Teams client that was kind of used across multiple people. This was kind of not a great scenario to run into, because if you think about the licensing costs there, you're paying now, your E3 plus phone system, plus if you're using calling plans on top of that. So what Microsoft added with this is that they made it so that you can just assign a Teams shared device license, which is $8 a user a month, to these phones, and it gives you a limited experience. You don't have your chat, you don't have all these other features you would normally have, but it gives you the ability to make calls, speed dials, and also access the walkie-talkie functionality. So the walkie-talkie functionality, I haven't talked too much about that, but it's kind of like the old I can't think of it. It's not Sprint. It was there was another vendor that used to be around the U.S.
Sprint. It was Sprint.
Oh, it was Sprint.
Sprint PCS. Yep.
Or Nextel.
Nextel.
Yeah, Nextel. That's the word I was looking for. It was like a yellow logo or something. I remember it being Nextel or something. But
yes.
But yeah, it was nice. You just press a button on the side of your phone and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And anybody that's part of that group would just immediately get a walkie-talkie if they're 4 states over or not. So yeah, it was kind of a fun experience. But the nice thing is that's now in Teams. So that is additional functionality you get with the Teams mobile app. Now, this is great for non-DECT scenarios. So DECT is a long-range communication standard. Your old cordless phone was a DECT phone. If you remember, you could walk outside and your cordless phone at your house would still work. This is great for companies that have Wi-Fi coverage in their warehouses, but in scenarios where you need long range without wireless coverage, you have to look at other solutions as well. But at least I wanted to talk about this in case maybe you have that scenario that comes up, or maybe you even got like a floor in a hospital, or something where nurses need a phone to grab, and it doesn't need to be assigned to a specific user. Teams displays is kind of our next category of devices. This is effectively an Android device that I like to call a Teams Phone Plus. So it has all the functionality of a Teams phone minus the actual handset to grab onto, but it adds additional functionality such as a virtual front desk. Virtual front desk is a cool feature they recently announced like 3 or 4 months ago. And that functionality allows you to put the Teams display on a front desk. It allows someone to walk into your building and just press a single button, and it calls a receptionist or a group of users in a different area of the building. It also extends past what the Teams phone had and allows you to actually access files and Teams from the device. Allows you to leave notes in the lock screen. There's hands-free integration with Cortana. It allows you to even chat, so you can do full messaging with other users inside of Teams. But the way to look at the Teams display is to look at it as a dedicated display for the Teams. So it's not just kind of a this is my only device, but think of it as more as like a it's something like, let's say your computer crashes in the middle of the day. You still have a mostly fully functional device in front of you that you can use for Microsoft Teams. So it's pretty cool. You have the better together stuff. You have hot desking. You have all the stuff that you have on Teams phone, but it's also there on Teams displays as well. Teams Rooms. This is one of my favorite device categories. So Teams Rooms are run on Android or Windows. So you can have rooms that are Android, you can have rooms that are Windows. There's different functionalities between the two. Windows typically gets the features first before Android, if Android even does get those features. But there are some different costs between those. Android rooms sometimes can be cheaper than Windows rooms. It again comes down to the OEM that you're partnering with to build those rooms. But I talk about these devices because phone system again is optional on these devices. So if you add a phone, number to the device, if you're using direct routing as an example, you have the ability just to go on the device, make a phone call just like you would on any other Teams device in your environment. The licensing that comes with them is there's 2 license tiers. There's Teams Rooms Basic and Teams Rooms Pro. Teams Rooms Basic, pretty much 99 times out of 100, most organizations are not going to be using. Teams Rooms Basic is literally enough for you to get a single screen with that device joined into a Teams meeting, no additional functionality whatsoever. Not a single thing. So pretty much anybody who deploys a Teams Rooms is just pretty much getting a Teams Rooms Pro license, which is $40 per room per month. That license includes phone system licensing. So that means if you're using calling plans, you just add a calling plan license to it. If you're using Operator Connect or direct routing, you need no additional licensing. You just assign a phone number, you're good to go. These devices kind of quickly, without going too far in depth on them, allow for one-touch meeting join. They're flexible. So depending on your room requirements, depending on if you need multiple cameras, you need an interactive whiteboard, they support those. Provides kind of high quality audio video, whereas content sharing, whiteboarding, video layouts, they're secure, and it scales really for any size, to any size. From a 2-person huddle room to a large training room, there's a solution out there from different OEMs for Teams rooms. But I wanted to talk about those today from a voice perspective, at least, and just show that you don't need additional licenses potentially if you're using anything but calling plans for those rooms. Now, again, phone system is optional, so that phone system license again lets you dial out as like a without being in a meeting, and allows you to receive inbound calls again without being in a meeting. But like a Teams user, you have your dial in and dial out conferencing where you get that pool of 60 minutes per tenant per month per license that you have. So you're able to dial out from an existing meeting potentially through Microsoft's infrastructure without actually adding on any additional calling. So again, it's just like your user account in your Teams environment. It's not just kind of look at it as a user with a fancy device in a way. Teams panels, I just wanted to quickly, briefly touch on. So briefly, well, that's two adjectives. So briefly touch on. So this is a scheduling panel that goes outside your Teams meeting room. It more or less signs in as the room account, and it pretty much gives you information about the meeting space. You can reserve the room ad hoc. So let's say you're walking by the room, say, oh, it's free, let me reserve it. It doesn't let you invite attendees or anything, but it lets you just say hit reserve. It reserves it for 15, 30, 45 minutes, allows you to reserve it, and you can use that room, and it updates that calendar appropriately. But the Teams displays also have presence indicators on the outside that show the room presence. So if you're walking by a meeting room and it's red, somebody's in that room in a meeting. You can customize it. And then the last function is knock knock. And this is kind of a really cool piece that they recently added. So let's just say you're outside of a meeting room that somebody had a meeting booked 2 to 3 o'clock. And you're outside the room at 3:01, they're still not leaving the room. You can press a button without actually interrupting their meeting directly. You press a meeting on the touch console, pop up in the room and says the next party is waiting to use this room. So it kind of lets you knock on the door and say, hey, can we use the room without actually interrupting their meeting directly. So kind of moving away from meeting rooms, we want to talk about analog devices. So analog is more or less the ability to bring something that is not a IP-based system into Microsoft Teams for voice. So you have 2 big options here. Option 1 is you register supported devices to SIP Gateway. What I mean by supported devices is there is a list from Microsoft that says you're only able to register these devices from these exact manufacturers and these specific models. It is a whitelisted service, so it's not just I bring in any gateway from 20 years ago and I bring it to Teams. It doesn't work. The benefit of SIP Gateway is that it works with all voice services. So whether you're using calling plans, Operator Connect, direct routing, anybody on any of those voice environments can reach that gateway or the device that they need to place a call to it. And because again, it provides a routable user object. The difference here, though, is that you cannot put fax machines on this connected to Teams for voice service. You cannot put elevator phones on this connected to Teams voice service. And you also cannot put FXO paging devices on this. You can put paging devices on it, but not FXO paging devices. Per line per month, it is $8 per user per month. So it is, again, using that Teams shared device license that you already have. And then if you have, let's just say, an 8-port analog gateway, if you're registering all 8 ports at 8 times 8, that's $64 a month before tax for just standard phone service to that without even getting calling plans or anything else. So direct routing Opera Connect, that's fine. But then if you're doing calling plans, then you have to add a calling plans license on top of that. So it can get very pricey very quick. This is useful in a lot of scenarios, but there are scenarios where what if I need a fax machine? What if I need elevator phones or I need FXO paging? This is where you're going to be looking at registering those devices directly to a supported carrier, or you're going to be looking at registering those devices to your SBC that you have for direct routing. Again, that provides you the most flexibility. It works with all, with direct routing and most DRAS providers. Now, the only problem with this, and this is the asterisk, is if the user that is assigned to that analog registration in a way, if they are assigned a 10-digit phone number that is let's just say internal only. So it's a non-DID. It's not accessible from the actual PSTN. So I can't just pick it up from my cell phone and dial it. The only people from Microsoft Teams that will be able to call that will be a user that is set up for direct routing. So if you've got somebody that's set up for calling plans, they won't be able to call that user across that direct routing trunk. Because again, there's no user object. You're just kind of setting up something custom on your SBC and your infrastructure to handle that. Now, if it is through a carrier and the carrier is providing SIP registration, they're likely going to give you a DID that's assigned to it where you can reach it from that. That is perfectly fine. You can still do that. But it's the moment where you're needing maybe calling plans and direct routing combined, you're not going to be able to reach those users because, again, there's no user object. You're not paying per user per month Microsoft. You're just kind of paying for whatever SIP registration licenses are for your SBC, and that's it. So that's kind of the big one there. Any questions around analog before I move away? Okay. And so before we get to Enel 1, we have one bit on advanced phone system features. And so this is more or less just a very high level overview of what kind of additional features you have outside of just assigning a phone number to a user in Microsoft Teams. So the first two are kind of combined in one. They're referenced as auto attendance and call queues. Auto attendants are more or less kind of the start of an automated call flow. These handle business hour routing, so you can set time of day routing, holiday routing, and you can change the word that call routes based on those parameters. It allows you to play greetings. You can either use their text-to-speech options, you can record a greeting and upload it. It allows you to add menu options or even just simply redirect the call. That's another option. You can set it up to where it says, hey, thank you for calling the UC user group. Please hold while we transfer your call, and it just transfers your call automatically. You can set up that way as well. But the benefit here is that routing, you can change the routing again by time of day and by holidays. Now, in addition to this, it also provides a dial by name directory option as well. So you could have it to where you could say, I want to call, you call into, you say Sharon Weaver. The call say, hey, are you sure? I found this person in the global address list. Do you want me to transfer the call? It transfers the call directly to Sharon, whether or not she's a phone system user or not. You can whitelist that to include and exclude people, but that's kind of just the general feature there. The other part that's recently new is that you can also give users certain rights to manage these without being a Teams admin. So within their Teams client, they can go through and change the announcements today. Likely new features will be added to that in the future where they can manage the entire auto tenant based on what role they have assigned to them. Call queues kind of go along with these because typically you have an auto tenant that routes to a call queue or a group of users that all need to receive a call at a similar time, at the same time, or at a specific routing order. So this allows you effectively to ring multiple users. There's 4 different routing methods. Without going to the specifics on those, it's more or less a tenant routing. You ring all the users at once. You have serial routing. You have round robin. You have also longest idle. And some of those rely on presence-based routing and other things. For the kind of high-level overview of it, it allows you to simply route the call to multiple users. Now, this also has additional routing options based on the parameters of the call. So you have call overflow handling. So that's where, let's just say, if I have 10 people dialing in, maybe at 10 people dialing in, I don't want anybody else to be able to get that call. Or maybe I don't want 11 people sitting in a queue waiting a hold because I don't have the capacity to handle that many calls. So the moment that 11th person joins the call, it will just say, okay, go down this other routing path. And typically you either have that transfer to like a shared voicemail or maybe an auto attendant or something else to get them to a different spot in the company. Timeout handling is if a user's been on hold for X number of minutes and seconds, what happens to the call. So if the user's been on hold for 10 minutes, maybe we don't want to waiting on hold any longer, just automatically transfer them to a voicemail. And then the new one is no user signed in routing options. So this is where there's nobody even signed into the queue. There's no agents available. What happens? So then that's where it'll make another routing decision based on what you define there. The other feature you get with this is that it allows a user to selectively dial out as the queue or auto attendant they're assigned to as part of this. So for example, an IT help desk, they have an auto attendant that does business hour readings, business hour routing. It routes to IT help desk call queue. The user in that call queue, if they want to place a call to a user, they can dial out. When you hit the call button in Teams, they'll say, do you want to dial as yourself or do you want to dial as the IT help desk? So when they make that call out, the person who receives the call will say, hey, I missed a call from the IT help desk. So when the call comes back in, it's going to go to the queue for everybody instead of just going back to that one specific user. So you have the ability to add that as well, optionally to different calls. Without going into full detail, there's other features at a glance. You have call hold, allows you to do custom hold music. With Teams, there's blind and consultative call transfer. Call park allows you to pretty much park a call on extension 100. You go to any other phone, you dial in 100, and it picks up the call just like nothing ever happened. You have caller ID policies, which lets you force all calls to go out a specific caller ID. So maybe you have a main number that you want all users when they dial out, it goes out as a main number. There's voicemail policies where you get customizations of voicemail. There's a lot more really there. Without really diving into all those specifics, it's kind of just like there's a lot of features to Teams Voice, and it's always expanding. Now, the last one I want to talk about is emergency E911 notifications and information about this. Now, I can spend easily 3-4 hours talking about E911 and Teams, but I want to go over just kind of a few basics. So in the US, you must configure Teams to determine the exact location of a user the moment they dial a 911 from within Microsoft Teams. Now, this is limited to the scope of any building that your organization owns for this. If a user is working from home, this does not apply. This is only for the specifics of a user within a building that you own in part of your company. We need to specifically determine that that user is in that building at that specific location. So a great way to think about this is that it's per building, per floor, a user must be identified. You have a 10-floor building. When you place an 911 call, I have to automatically know that your user is on the 9th or 10th floor in that building. Now, there are some restrictions around this. Again, this is very high level. There are different federal laws. Typically, the rule of thumb is less than 60,000 square foot. It needs to be identified. If it's more than that, you have to do like 12th floor east, 12th floor west, so you can separate those environments out. But again, that varies based on the state that you live in. There's different laws based on the different states. So Kentucky and Florida, I think those are down to even the 40,000 range per floor. So you have to split it off, split that floor into 40,000 square foot sections. So again, it varies based on where you are at. Now, the order in which this is determined by is kind of a linear path. So into Teams, you don't have to program all of this in. You can program some of it. It just depends on how your network is laid out. So BSSIDs. So BSSIDs are more or less a unique identifier for a specific radio and a specific SSID on an access point. So what that means is that every access point, if you have 2 SSIDs, you have a corporate network and a guest network. Each AP has 2 radios inside of it. You've got 4 BSSIDs per access point. Those 4 BSSIDs must be added into Microsoft Teams. Now, there's different restrictions around different vendors. Some vendors, derive their BSSIDs differently, so you can kind of get away with different wildcards into things, but depending on the vendor. But for the most part, you need to add in those BSSIDs to Teams. So for your wireless users, if you have a massive list of all your access points in Teams, I can just say, oh, if I'm connected to this access point, boom, it's in the 12th floor east side location of this building. Done. Easy. Wired users is where things get very complex. So if you have an IP address per floor or per area that you're separating off, perfect. All you need to put in here is IP address. But if your organization is not set up like that, you have to have LDP enabled on your switches, and you either add in the switch chassis ID or the switch port MAC address ID per port per switch. Because maybe you got an IDF that spans 2 floors, and maybe the switches in there it's a giant stack, and maybe half the switches are this floor and the other one's another floor. You have to be able to uniquely identify those areas and say that if a user plugs in any of these ports, we can tell with 100% certainty that that's 12th floor east or some other area. Now, it does this in order. So let's say I'm a wireless client, and maybe I didn't add the BSSID in my access point, but I added the subnet. I could say, okay, I connected here. My phone, it's going to place a 911 call. It's going to look at the BSSID, no match. Switch port, no match. Switch chassis, no match. The last match it's going to look for is the internal IP. If it matches that, you can at least get to the front door of the building. But then it also looks for an and there. It's kind of a match statement where it also must match the external IP of that building. So if you match those 2 scenarios, it could determine the location. So the reason why they have this is, let's just say your home subnet's 192.168.0.0/24. If your office is the same exact subnet, I would hope it isn't, but if it is, that's not enough to say that the user is at home versus in the building. So we look at that external IP address. Big thing here is that I want you to refer to Kerry's Law and Raybum's Act at 911.gov. They'll give you all the information by state and other requirements that you must have in place when you deploy your team's voice solution. But again, no matter what voice solution you're using, calling plans, operator connect, direct routing, you have to have 911 information deployed in Microsoft Teams for the US specifically. Other countries have different laws, but for the US, it is the most strict when it comes to 911 and emergency configurations. So with that, questions. So Chad has a question. So he has all their users running out of a VDI environment. It would appear that all the users would be coming from their data centers. So this is a problem that we have today with E911. Because again, if you're running a VDI, you're running on a virtual desktop that's on a server in some data center somewhere. How do you determine where that location of that user is? So with VDI, there is no dynamic E911. Unfortunately, there is no way to say that this user is in this location. However, the way that you build this and the way that you set this up is that you build it to where those users get a notification in their Teams client with an emergency calling policy that says, if you're assigned to Teams, make sure you set your location manually, and then you exclude the subnet that the VDI infrastructure is in from the emergency location information inside of Teams. So that way, when they go to their phone dial pad in Microsoft Teams, it'll say no location found. And then because they're part of a custom emergency calling policy that says you're using VDI, please, set your location manually, it effectively tells the user they need to set the location. Now, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get the user to set the location. It's really no way to force that for the user. However, what will happen is if they place a 911 call and there's no location found, the call will be routed to emergency call routing center, which will handle, hey, we don't know your location. Where are you at? What's your address? Where are you calling from? And then they transfer you to the correct PSAP based on your location information that you give to them. So at least it gives you an option for getting 911 services in that scenario. Thank you for the question as well, Chad. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you guys all again. I'll let Sharon. I don't know if Sharon has anything else to say, but I appreciate you guys having me. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Always happy to assist. And we'll go from there. Thank you, everybody.